Hello, everybody, and welcome to our final webinar in the Naturalist Notes webinar series. My name is Susie Fortner, and I am the Programs and Operations Director with Friends of the Dunes.
Hello, everyone, and I'm Daisy Ambries. I'm the Outreach Manager at Friends of the Dunes. So first, I want to acknowledge that Friends of the Dunes and our staff are working and living on the unceded territory of the Wiyot people, which include the Wiyot tribe, Bear River Rancheria, and Blue Lake Rancheria. Wiyot people continue to be the working stewards of the lands, waterways, air, plants, and animals of their ancestral homelands, which include the stretch of land between Pulut, Gasamuli, Little River, and Ruski, Huit, Bear River Ridge since time immemorial. The Wiyot people have survived violent colonization, genocide, and attempted erasure of their people and culture. Today, I want to share a wonderful website called honortax.org. I will link that in the chat below in a few seconds. Through this website, you can give an honor tax to the Wiyot, and honor tax is a monetary way of recognizing and respecting the Wiyot's native sovereignty. So on your screen, you'll be able to see place names for locations near Wiki, Humboldt Bay, and Sulatluk, the Wiyot language. Today, I'm joining in from Jarujiji, Eureka, and I would love to hear where everyone is tuning in from and their ancestral lands if you know them. Please remember to toggle the blue button in your chat box to include both the panelists and the attendees so we can all see where you're coming from. So for each webinar, we'll be introducing a Sulatluk word of the day. Today's word is wuduh, meaning dunes.
Thanks for being here for this webinar. You're here to support Friends of the Dunes, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to conserving the natural diversity of coastal environments through community-supported education and stewardship programs. And this year happens to be our 40th year anniversary. Okay, there it goes. So that's what we're celebrating tonight with this final webinar in our series. I'm excited to hear more from our presenters tonight about that and the 40-year history of conserving our coastal environments here in Humboldt County. The proceeds from this webinar series support our Coastal Naturalist Training, which is a California naturalist program that we offer in the fall. We were able to successfully offer a safe, completely in-person coastal naturalist training last year. And we are cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to do the same thing this year. So that'll be taking place September through October. It's a wonderful program. I highly recommend if you just want to learn more about our coastal environments from a lot of local experts, including some of the presenters that we're going to be hearing from this evening.
So a quick, couple of quick housekeeping items. As I mentioned before, please feel free to communicate amongst yourselves within the chat and toggle who you're sending the message to by clicking on the blue button in your chat box. If you have questions for the presenter, please type them into the Q&A rather than the chat. The Q&A is a little button down below in your Zoom web box. So all of these webinars have been recorded. If you're interested in viewing past webinars, please let us know. We will be sending you a link to the recording for this webinar within the next few days, just in case if you have to hop off a little bit sooner. Today's webinar will be a little bit longer than past, simply because we have three incredible presenters today. We'll be hearing from Carol Vandermeer, Andrea Pickart, and Mike Sipra. So without further ado, I will let our first presenter introduce herself.
Yeah, and real quick, as I stop sharing my screen here, I'm just going to ask people to also share in the chat how long you have been involved with Friends of the Dunes as Carol comes on and starts to share her screen.
All right. I think I'm going to say a few words first before I share my screen. Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. I'm Carol Vandermeer. I'm currently on the board of directors of Friends of the Dunes, and I'm a past executive director and a lifelong now dune lover and Friends of the Dunes. And so thanks for joining us tonight to celebrate this 40th anniversary of coastal conservation. And really my theme tonight is Friends would not be where it is today without the support and help of multiple partnerships and collaboration with community members, volunteers, agencies, researchers, and all different local organizations. So anything I say tonight, I want to emphasize that. Tonight, I'm going to start out by sharing some of the highlights and the partnerships and people who have helped shape Friends of the Dunes. And boy, 15 minutes is not long to kind of cover the highlights of 40 years. So it's been a fun journey for me to kind of dig back in the time machine. But also, as Stacy mentioned, tonight, Andrea Picard will be speaking and focusing on the conservation and restoration milestones and the Coastal Resilience Project. And then wrapping up will be Mike Sipper, the executive director, kind of talking more about where we are today and where we're going. With that, I think I will start by sharing my screen. And I believe you can all see me now, the screen. So as many of you know, Friends of the Dunes really did start out as Friends of the Dunes Preserve. And tonight, like I said, I'll give you just a few highlights from that 40-year journey from our beginnings with the Nature Conservancy to where we are today as a nonprofit. And on the left, you can see the original t-shirt designed by Gary Bloomfield. And I believe we're going to be having that design as part of our 40th anniversary with Friends of the Dunes on it. So that's exciting. So for starters, I just wanted to kind of talk back. Oh, hang on a minute. I think I skipped. There we go. I knew I skipped something. Before I jump into that history, we owe a great deal to the Lanpheres. Bill and Hortense, pictured in the lower part of your screen, if it were not for them donating their land to the Nature Conservancy and also talking their neighbor into donating land, we wouldn't be where we are today. And Hortense was a really remarkable person. I never got to meet her. I didn't know her son Star and learned much about her. She was an author. Many of you probably know Bedlam on the Slough she wrote, which is a fun read for those of you who are dune enthusiasts. She was a great artist, loved mushrooms, and she is credited with really being instrumental in having the vision of starting HSU, now Cal Poly Humboldt's Natural Resource Department back in the 30s, which is a pretty amazing achievement for a woman back then. And so I really wanted to kind of acknowledge that, and she was a pistol packing defender of the dunes. I think Andrea may have a few more words about that. In the early days, in the early days, the Humboldt State University actually leased the land from the Nature Conservancy, and a management committee made up of HSU faculty really oversaw the management. Their focus was on research, public education, and restoration goals. And this was in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. And the committee, there was a small cabin on the property, and it actually used to be a cabin where Star, Hortense's son, lived. And the committee thought that that cabin would be best suited to have a couple living there. And it is at that time, Sue Van Hook and her husband George began living in the cabin, and when she became the part-time preserve manager. So in 1982, Sue Van Hook was a preserve manager, and she started Friends of the Lanphere-Christensen Dunes Preserve. And I spoke a little bit with her in preparation for this presentation, which was fun. And she told me she wrote a brochure to officially launch the organization with the Nature Conservancy. And right away, they had over 300 members and $10,000 for the Nature Conservancy. And so right away off at the beginning, it was a big success there. And she spent 2 years as a part-time preserve manager for the Nature Center. And Sue, I asked her to share a little quote since I wasn't there at this time. I wanted to hear the voices of those who were. And she said, quote, "I was captivated, awed, and tremendously grateful for the opportunity to live and do my graduate research on the preserve. I was also able to bring up our first of 3 daughters into being a Dunes child," which I thought was kind of cool. Oh gosh, I'm making sure I get in the right spot. So I just have a little bit of a quick collection of some of the early shots, and some of you who are on the webinar tonight may recognize some folks. In 1980, I'll just kind of go over some highlights. In 1983, officers and directors were elected, and including Andrea Picard, who will be speaking later. Linda Letton, now Linda Alm, became the president of Friends of the Dunes in 84. And in 1985, Andrea Picard became the new preserve manager. Sue Van Hook moved out to Maine at that time. So in 1986, I hear so much about the Great Barn Dance fundraisers. I wasn't around for that time, but that sounded like a great deal of fun. In 87, the Canoe the Slough was established as a fundraiser. In 88, Friends held their first retreat. And in, I think, let's see, I'm looking, I gotta rearrange things. The North Country Fair and Spin the Wheel. Some of you may know about that. And Lisa Hoover became president in 1986. And later, John St. Marie, who's currently on our board, he also was president starting in 1990. And that's a picture of the two of them from probably in that era, in the 90s. So anyway, I asked John, who's been so involved and so dedicated for so many years, to share a quote as well. And he said, "The beauty and charm of the dunes has always enchanted me. What keeps me involved with Friends of the Dunes is the blending of special people with a very special place. It has been my privilege to witness the growth of such a dynamic organization, and I'm grateful for all the people that made it possible." And one of his really strong memories that obviously had an impact on him was from early days at a Friends retreat at the Golden Harvest Cafe, where we used to meet. A local author, Conrad Bonifazzi, spoke about the importance of maintaining a healthy mindset and attitudes, and he advised that optimism was the only option. And I really appreciate John's optimism. And Lisa, I first became involved with Friends attending a docent training where Lisa was speaking about endangered species need for protection, as well as Andrea, and John organized that. Oops. Oh, hang on a minute. I don't know why. There we go. Some other early dates. The Friends of the Dunes Preserve also lent their sweat equity in 1989 and assisting in building the office, which now serves as the office for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Linda Miller, also pictured here in the new office, did spend some time as manager of the preserve and assistant manager. But I think it's just a testimony to how important it was to have friends and have community volunteers involved. I do want to say I didn't have a picture of it, but around 1991, Friends of the Dunes got their first office actually above the old Hubcap building on Samoa Boulevard. And kind of interesting little personal side note, our office was sublet to us by who is now my husband. I didn't know at the time, Stephen Vandermeer. And we had a chance to have our office right there. And at that point in time, Friends got more and more involved with education and helping in assisting with restoration. The Mad River Slough Dunes, which is now known, and I'll tell the story as we go, as the Malel Dunes, opened up in 1990. And this was, I think Friends was very involved in supporting that opening. And this was made possible by a cooperative management agreement. And it was by, the Nature Conservancy, Bureau of Land Management, Louisiana Pacific. And here, pictured here are the CCCs after putting up the new sign. And what's interesting about that era is in 1993, the county approved the Dunes Coastal Management Plan. But what happened is when that plan got to be approved by the commission, I believe was the sequence, the Buggy Club announced that Louisiana Pacific had sold their parcel to them. And so what happened is that negated the agreement that was the cooperative agreement, and the area was closed. I know when I first visited the area in 93, I walked out at the Mad River Slough Dunes and thought, what an amazing place. And when I got back in 94, it was closed. And I'll mention a little more later, but it would actually take another 17 years before it was fully open to the public. But that was a very important part of what Friends did. So continuing along our timeline, in 1995 was a transfer of the Lanphere Dunes from the Nature Conservancy. Well, actually, there were a few steps, but it was transferred to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And that was a time of struggle for some who had been very connected to the Nature Conservancy. But I know that that is what the Nature Conservancy has done at times, is find other appropriate and suitable landowners. And thankfully, Andrea continued on with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to have that continuity of management. And that was about the time I went to a volunteer meeting, and somebody, Dawn St. Marie, said, who would like to be new director? And I raised my hand, and voila, I became a new volunteer director then. And at that point in time, Friends needed to decide what they wanted to do. Did we want to be our own nonprofit, be under the umbrella of another organization, or dissolve? And we made the decision to become our own nonprofit, and went through the paperwork and got new directors. And around that same time, we had an office at the Manila Community Center. Now, this picture shows us at the community center in our new big office, but originally our office was the old boys' restroom. We actually had to get the urinal moved out before we all moved in. So we've come a long way, I will have to say. 96 was another really exciting time. In addition to becoming our own nonprofit officially, there was a summer restoration, which was a collaborative effort with Manila Community Services District, Fish and Wildlife Service, and so on. And that's where the Sand Sculpture Festival started. Now, these are pictures a little later, but it continued for well over 20 years and continues in various forms to this day. But it all started back in 96 through partnership and collaboration. Also in 97, the docent, what was known as docent training, kind of got a new emphasis on coastal naturalist training, got renamed coastal naturalist training. And now Susie and staff have really elevated that even higher, and we continue to engage community members in learning about and sharing their love of the coastal dunes. Other important milestones. In 97, I was honored to work with Shane Green and Jennifer Blosser to write a grant to start the Bay to Dunes education program, which is going strong today. And in 1999, we actually started what was the DIRT team, or Dune Ecosystem Restoration Team. And that I appreciated Andrea's support with that, and that continues to work at various locations helping restore the dunes. Back in 2000 was another very, very important milestone. And that was when we actually updated mission statement, changed our bylaws to formally become a land trust. And so it was recognized that, you know, with the Nature Conservancy's departure, there was sort of a gap in adjoining private lands. So I'm going to kind of share, thus the development of the land trust kind of filled that private entity, collaborative partner in conservation. And at this time in 2000, we adopted that mission statement, and Lisa Hoover actually chaired the Land Trust Committee and really helped move that forward. And I have a quote from Lisa. Lisa said, "I was driven to connect the coastal landscape to best ensure long-term conservation. A borderless viewshed as such habitats need. The expansion of Friends of the Dunes engagement in the current Samoa dunes and wetlands is a testimonial to connectivity and the landscape view." So really appreciated all the hard work Lisa put into helping guide us as a new land trust. Back in 2005 was our first Ocean Day, again, continuing to this day, which was pretty exciting. Prior to all the support we've had from the BLM, we were down at the South Spit. These are like 1,000 kids lined up, spelling out messages, taking a stand in the sand for conservation. And let's see. Also, in the early, I think I missed us. There we go. Thank you. Sorry about that. In 2007, we purchased what many know as the Stamps House. It was actually a former home of the Stamps family, a retirement home built from a kit. And here pictured on the left is us toasting the signing of the purchase of this property, the first parcels from the Stamps family, with lots of support from multiple agencies, including the State Coastal Conservancy and Wildlife Conservation Board and others. Let's see. So we began the process of creating the Humboldt Coastal Nature Center. And thank goodness we have a strong volunteer corps, because part of the process of rehabbing and redesigning that building was to put a new roof on it. And to do that, we had to take off thousands of tires packed with sand, and could not have been possible without volunteers. I'll tell you, it took a while we got funding for doing this whole project, but we got it right before the Great Recession hit. So it took quite some time after our funds were frozen. We launched our capital campaign during the recession. It was tough. So it wasn't until 2011 that we broke ground. And it was a complete overhaul. We lowered the floor. We put in lots of green features. We had volunteers planting the roof, and luckily, we now in 2011, the Humboldt Coastal Nature Center was opened, and we had a dedication in May. And it was a great labor that could not have been done without the support of volunteers and community donors and agency funders. Also that same year, that was the year the Malel Dunes reopened. And that was exciting. To finally get that back open and be a unit of the Humboldt Bay National Wildlife Refuge, and Friends of the Dunes helped support doing guided walks out there, and I was able to participate in the public access planning. It was a very exciting time. Also in 2012, that's when many of our great fundraisers, and some of them are coming right up, were begun, including Wine by the Sea and the outdoor gear sale. And in 2014, we acquired the last piece of property that was adjoining our property called the Bar Parcel. This is a remarkable small little piece of 2.8 acres, but it has amazing wildflower habitat, and we're continuing to work to incorporate that into our plans for managing and conserving the coast. And thanks to our Land Trust Committee for getting that moving. Before I wrap up and pass it on to the next talk, I just want to say one of the things that struck me as I went through the old pictures and all is so many friends, so many relationships that have been developed over the years, and people who continue to be involved with Friends of the Dunes. Lots of holiday parties going on the upper left. Denise Seeger, there's baby Jordan, and Denise is still down at Humboldt Bay National Wildlife Refuge. Emily Walter, longtime staff person. Kathy Kelly started out, she was a volunteer coordinator at TNC and continues to be a great supporter and one of my best buds. Roy Marin down in the lower, he actually took the lead in the early days of the Dune Ecosystem Restoration Team with star volunteer Baden Jantz. And in the lower right, we've got past board member Marge Fay, and of course, Susie Fortner, who's still a superstar staff person, and her friend Stephanie. So it's, has really struck me as how deep the friendships are here at Friends of the Dunes. So in 2015 was when I decided it was time to step aside, and I'd done my stint as executive director, but as you can see, I'm still forever connected to Friends of the Dunes, and will forever be replenished by the beauty of our coastal dunes. So I really appreciate the opportunity to do a quick breeze through of some of the highlights of our development as an organization. And it's now my pleasure to turn it over to Andrea Picard and express my gratitude to Andrea for her many, many years of dedication. And she'll share her perspective on 40 years of coastal dune conservation.
Sorry for the logistics. And I apologize, but my camera's not working, so you're just going to hear my voice today. And so I'm Andrea Picard, and I have been involved with the Friends of the Dunes since 1982. I've been working for the Nature Conservancy, followed by the Fish and Wildlife Service since 1984. So I have a long history. I've done a number of different jobs during that time: preserve manager, area ecologist, and now I'm the coastal ecologist with the Fish and Wildlife Service. So I wanted to start this slide with the first female refuge or preserve manager, Hortense Lanphere, and Carol gave you some information about her. I won't elaborate any more on that, but you can see, I want you to notice she's wearing a plaid shirt. And then the second preserve manager female is Sue Van Hook. She's leading a group of kids here. And she was in the early 80s. And then this is a picture of her and I, and now you can notice we're both wearing plaid shirts. So if you're interested in the future at the Lanphere Dunes, you need to pick up plaid shirts. So we're actually experimenting with rock salt there as a method of controlling European beach grass. Sue started the Ammophila eradication program at the Lanphere Dunes. She experimented with a number of different methods and settled on the good old digging method, which seemed to work the best of anything, although it was the most labor intensive. And even before the Friends of the Dunes existed, she was getting community members out there to help her. But once the Friends of the Dunes formed, that was one of the things that they did. So here they are with their plaid shirts, working on the foredune at the Lanphere Dunes. And an even longer history of restoration and involvement by the Friends is revolves around the yellow bush lupin, which started being controlled in the 1970s by John Sawyer, a Humboldt State University ecology professor, who recognized the damage that this shrub was doing to the dunes. It was quite controversial at the time because this plant had not yet been recognized as non-native to our area. And in fact, later, Linda Miller, who was mentioned, did her senior project tracing the introduction of this species to our dunes. So John, who's on the, well, he's almost on the left there. He's just to the right of the person on the left. And his wife, Jane Cole, is next to him. Started bringing out CNPS members back in the 70s. This is already 82 with the Friends involved. And in fact, you can see me in the purple shirt, and that's a Friends of the Dune shirt right there with the Menzies wallflower on it. So this is an FOD event. And it went on. It's now in its something like 46th year. This is 1983. You can see we had a nice sunny February, like we're having this year, only much warmer. And here's an 85 shot of a great big pile of bush lupin. We had fun making really big piles because back in those days with less oversight, we got to burn the lupin right at the end of the day. So that's something that now takes all kinds of paperwork and a visit from regional staff to get done with the Fish and Wildlife Service. But it was a nice kind of ceremonial ending to the Lupin Bash in those days. So the Friends have been just, you know, the organizers of the Lupin Bash for all these many years. This is one in 1986, not so sunny and warm. That's Lisa Hoover down in the bottom row in the yellow rain jacket. I also see Kim Emperor with the TNC hat on. Going into the 1990s, when the Friends were really starting to attract a lot of people to the Lupin Bash, we started being able to move into new areas. There's Kathy Kelly. You can tell her in the center of the picture by her blonde curly hair. And this was 1990, and you might recognize Tony LaBanca, who's been a board member and various other things with the Friends of the Dunes over the years. And this is Emily Walter, who Carol mentioned, and she was the restoration manager for many years for the Friends. So she brought groups of people over to the Lanphere Dunes to do restoration work. Another species we've had to battle is ice plants, and we did that quite a bit with volunteers from the Friends of the Dunes. This is a volunteer day. This was actually a Lupin Bash that had too many people. We had so many people that we had to divert some of them over to do ice plant on another part of the dunes. 2007, you can see a volunteer wrestling with a very large lupin. 2012, they're getting into the old growth. This is Roy Marin in 2014. That patch no longer comes up. And another species we've worked with is annual grasses, and that's Denise Seeger in the middle, working with some volunteers pulling annual grass, which is another thing the Friends have helped us with. So going back to the European beach grass, because that's been by far the largest restoration effort that we've done, we had to call in the CCCs. We were really fortunate back in the early 1990s to get funding from the Nature Conservancy, a total of $300,000 to do all to restore all the European beach grass on the dunes. And in 2005, we received another grant. Well, it was actually a mitigation project by the Department of Corrections, and they brought out CDF con crews to do the work. So that was really great. I'm going to show you a couple of before after photos so you can appreciate. This is at Malel Dunes. This is a very early picture at the Lanphere Dunes. Looks overwhelming, but here we are in 2013. Lovely Elamis mollis, the native dune grass, growing where European beach grass was. In this area, the lower right was already dug, but the background hadn't been. And here you can see a nice incipient foredune formed by Elamis mollis, and then the foredune with dune mat on it. And one more at Malel. we did plant Elamis atmolel. It didn't come in on its own. So this shows all of the restored lands as of today, taking up a very nice long stretch of the North Spit. Just recently, in the last 5 years, we've been focusing more on climate change impacts, and there's been a couple of grants, large grants, that funded what's now called the Humboldt Coastal Resilience Project, which relied quite a bit on volunteers. Our goal was to understand and prepare for climate change vulnerabilities of dunes and beaches along the Eureka littoral cell. This is Candace Reynolds. She was a leading person in this study. One of the objectives of the study was to document what's called the morphodynamics, or the changing form and shape of the dunes, and the sediment budgets, how much sand is coming in and going out, using cross-shore transects. And then that data would be used later in modeling. So this shows we had a total of, how many? 32, it doesn't sound like enough, but I'm blanking on the number. Transects all along the North and South Spits, the Little River Clam Beach area, and the Eel River North and South Spits. I think it's more like 72. And so it takes 2 people to take these measurements. Candace in the middle is taking an elevation measurement. Alex on the left is taking a vegetation measurement. We had to deploy people over that very large 52 kilometers of dunes. And so we really relied on volunteers. We would train them to do the vegetation measurements, and then they'd come along and, you know, help out. And that was a really big contribution of the friends. Another objective we had was to test the hypothesis that native dune plants increase resiliency to sea level rise, and that native foredunes built by native plants are broader and allow more sand to bypass the foredune compared to ammophilid foredunes, suggesting that native foredunes might be more resilient to climate change. So we took a stretch of dunes and we took all the ammophila off 3/4 of it, left it on 1/4 as a control, and had 3 different treatments in the other 3/4 using Elamis, dune mat species, and a combination of Elamis and dune mat species to see how they all responded and whether they would influence the morphodynamics. This is a picture of volunteers. We use volunteers here too, and they're planting plugs of native plants. We've also used volunteers in the salt marsh. This is a Spartina seed bank study that we had some volunteer help on. When we were starting in 2008, we started eliminating Spartina densiflora, very nasty invasive in the salt marsh. And the treatment of it was not suitable for volunteers because you use a heavy brush cutter, but we wanted to experiment with whether we needed to revegetate, and that was done all with volunteers. So we had a large area there where we collected plugs and planted them in. And as it turned out, we didn't need to do this. And that's why we did it in a small scale as an experiment. So we didn't waste a lot of time, but it turns out the salt marshes recover very well on their own. So yeah, just a picture of a Friends of the Dunes dirt member who's enjoying himself. And this is, I think, a group of salt marsh volunteers. The next few slides I have, I'm gonna play some music with them, and that's the end of my show. So sorry while I get kind of clunky here for a minute to get that happening. So I'll just mention that one of the privileges I've had of being out there so long is happening to be in the right place at the right time for some of these very inspirational moments like the so thank you all for listening, and I'm going to turn it over to Mike now.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Mike Cipra. I'm currently the executive director of Friends of the Dunes. And well, I just want to say what an honor it is to be able to present with Carol Vandermeer and Andrea Picard, two of my heroes, and two people who have been so instrumental in conserving and restoring native coastal dunes here in Humboldt Bay. So what I'd like to talk about a little bit is where do we go from here? Maybe talk a little bit about the future directions, where we are right now and where we might go. And I think the theme of this presentation is that we can only do this if we're working in partnership with all of you, with the members, with the different partners of Friends of the Dunes. That's what truly makes this project over time such an inspiration and makes it such a pleasure to work on is that we're working together with people who care. Can't really talk about the future without, I think, acknowledging, let's see. There we go. Yeah, I think it's really important to acknowledge the past, and if we're talking about land stewardship, all of these lands were stewarded for millennia, since time immemorial by Wiyot people. And the reason that what we have is so special here in our dunes and in Humboldt Bay is because people have been stewarding these lands for thousands of years, literally thousands of years. And I think it's really important to recognize that when we're talking about partnerships and talking about future directions. I think it's more than what we say at the beginning of a presentation. It really, I think it informs our values, it informs our directions, it informs the work that we do. And I think that's really a really critical point. Carol Vandermeer took us up to 2015, her time as executive director of Friends of the Dunes. I started with Friends of the Dunes in 2019, so I do think that another acknowledgement is in order here, that there were some transitions of leadership after 2015, and I think two people who are really critical to the history of Friends of the Dunes really need to be acknowledged for their role throughout time in working, and then also in easing that transition and helping us find our future direction. And those two people are Susie Fortner, our programs and operations director currently, and you'll recognize her, I'm sure, from hosting this webinar, and Emily Walter, our longtime restoration manager, and also served as interim executive director. And Susie did as well during that period of transition of leadership. And I think both of these women are really intelligent and thoughtful and great leaders, and really gracefully took on increased responsibility in order to guide Friends of the Dunes into the future. And so I just want to make sure that that doesn't get lost in this history. Now let's take a step into more recent history and maybe steps into the current and future directions of Friends of the Dunes. In 2020, we had the opportunity to work on completing the largest conservation project in our history, Friends of the Dunes, in terms of the amount of land. And that's the Samoa Dunes and Wetlands Conservation Area. It includes lands that we originally looked to buy in 2003 as part of the Poopy Tract, as well as lands that some people know as the Dog Ranch. And you can see it's this really inspiring, expansive landscape. You probably also noticed the collection of logos down at the bottom, that a project like this doesn't happen without a ton of partners. From those funding partners on the left there, the EEMP program, the Coastal Conservancy, the State of California's Wildlife Conservation Board, Wiyot Tribe continues to play a really strong role as a partner, as does the Bureau of Land Management. Friends of the Dunes is there and proud to stand with all of these partners, including the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Mike Van Hatten in particular played a critical role in putting together the funding for this project and pushing it forward. And the Humboldt Bay Harbor District played a really critical role as well. And you're not able to conserve these lands. You're not able to put these kinds of landscape scale conservation projects together without a lot of really committed partners working together. So we stepped in as the interim landowner and manager of the Samoa Dunes and Wetlands Conservation Area. If you haven't been out there, it's truly spectacular and remarkable in terms of its location. Down here, this is the bridge coming over from Eureka. Here's Tuluwat. And here's the Samoa Dunes and Wetlands Conservation Area, now connecting to some of those lands that Andrea was pointing out have been restored over time. And the total amount now, if you're going from the north all the way down to the tip of Samoa Dunes and Wetlands Conservation Area, we're over 1,700 acres, starting from 40 acres at Lanphere. It's really a remarkable thing, and it's a testament to all of these people working together over time and recognizing that what we have here in Humboldt Bay is truly special. I want to point out there are some parcels on the bay side. I'll come back to those. And then you can see there's a network of trails. Perhaps you've been able to go out there since we took ownership in late 2020 to hike on these trails, to explore. You can see it's a very densely forested area, really profoundly forested. And that's what that forest looks like when you're just above the canopy. Really diverse forest, including Sitka spruce and shore pine, and wax myrtle in there, and even some of these old growth Douglas firs that are all gnarled and dripping with leather ferns. This is a group from the California Native Plant Society that's out there. A really inspiring landscape that adds to what we have here in Humboldt Bay. And this is the furthest southern extent of this mixed shore pine and Sitka spruce forest, furthest southern extent of it in the world. And it's got these fingers of forest reaching out into the dune swales. It's got broad open parabolic dunes. Truly remarkable and inspiring place that's, again, connected to these previous conservation investments and things that people have worked on. And by investment, I mean more than just money. People's lives have gone into conservation in Humboldt Bay. And that's really kind of at the core of Friends of the Dunes. This land has really varied and diverse habitat, running from the foredunes to these sort of dune swales and wetlands, to broad parabolic dunes and the dune forest, and that supports a wide variety of wildlife that can be seen out there, from these rough-skinned newts, tree frogs. You can hear them, choruses of them around rains. It's really beautiful. Some nesting ospreys came back to the property after we took ownership of it. Found lots of different nests of bees, including some colonies of silver bees out there in this habitat. You'll often see the gray fox prints. If you don't see the foxes themselves, you got to be up pretty early to catch those. And we did have this little guy come back into some of the foredune areas and on the wave slope. So this is a really remarkable place if you haven't been out to see it. And we are the interim landowner of 81 acres of wetland, 139 acres of forest, and all kinds of open dunes and really rare habitat types, including habitat for the Menzies wallflower, Humboldt Bay wallflowers, it's sometimes known. Little bright flags are going to be popping up over the next week or so. So I'd encourage you to go out there and explore, and beach lay is coming up all over the place as well. This is great habitat for endangered species. And the purpose of this project, again, is for protection of natural and cultural resources, to be able to study these places. And we have groups of students from Cal Poly Humboldt who are doing research projects out there right now. And then, of course, public access, consistent with these conservation objectives, and in the future, opportunities for restoration. And we have not pursued a coastal development permit for this in order to be able to remove vegetation. However, we have been able to remove a lot of the trash that was left over from previous ownership. We have now removed more than 5,000 pounds of trash from this property, working with partners like that's Mike Van Haddam from California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And then a different kind of horsepower here, working with the Redwood Unit Wilderness Riders and packing out trash out of hard to get to places with mules and restoring this really pristine, beautiful area for people to enjoy ultimately. And this holds all kinds of wonders and areas where people can explore. And these areas that are sort of to the west of Highway 255 are going to be going to the Bureau of Land Management ultimately for long-term permanent conservation ownership and management. You might recognize this from hiking out there. And this is the view again of Humboldt Bay here and the coast. And you can see this profound forest. These lands again on the west of Highway 255 will be going to the BLM probably by the end of this year. And then some of those lands on the eastern side are incredibly important and significant to Wiyot people. So these lands and waters will be going to the Wiyot tribe for conservation ownership and management. And those sorts of partnerships and thinking about protecting this landscape has got us thinking bigger at Friends of the Dunes. And so what we're proposing now is to connect these areas across Humboldt Bay that we've worked so hard with you to protect over time, connecting them as part of a new proposed Wigi Humboldt Bay and Dunes National Monument. Wigi being the Wiyot word for Humboldt Bay and its different habitats and its sacred lands. These are culturally and naturally significant places, and we believe they're nationally important and deserve that sort of national protection. And we hope that you're going to join with us and with our partners at the Wiyot tribe to advocate for the protection of these as part of a Wigi Humboldt Bay and Dunes National Monument. And that's the future direction in terms of this conservation project we've all been working on for more than 40 years now. Some of the benefits of a national monument would be more opportunities for cooperative management and to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge of Wiyot people and the knowledge that we've gained from work like Andrea's over the course of years. These places, we acknowledge they face some of the same threats, whether those are invasive species, whether it's climate change or sea level rise, as Andrea alluded to in her presentation about the Humboldt Coastal Resilience Project. Let's take that knowledge and apply it to working across the landscape. The National Monument can be a vehicle for that. And maybe attract more resources that we need to manage and protect these special places for our kids and grandkids. And of course, there's probably going to be some ecotourism opportunities as well, but really this is about what's best for the land. And this is a picture just taken last week, looking out over the Malel Dunes, South Unit up to the north towards Malel Dunes and Lanphere. These are inspiring lands. And oftentimes we go into a forest and we're looking down and we're looking at what we have immediately in front of us. But I would encourage us to take a view, the long view of what opportunities we have now and in the future to protect these places, to reinvest in them, and to continue to work together as Friends of the Dunes, all of us as Friends of the Dunes, to make sure that these special places are protected and restored for the future. So with that, I think that's kind of the end of our presentation, and I think we're open to questions.
Thank you so much, Mike and Andrea and Carol. That was just like so heartwarming, and I was literally almost in tears for parts of it. It's just these gorgeous images of what we're all here, what brings us all together, as Carol had mentioned, just those relationships that are built to from this common interest of conserving these beautiful, amazing places. So yeah, if folks have questions, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A. I'm gonna just continue to stall a little bit while we wait and see if there are good questions there. But yeah, thank you so much, Mike and Carol and Andrea. I am so appreciative of the three of you, and I'm so appreciative of all of the people who've put in so much amazing work to conserve and restore these beautiful dune systems. And I'm seeing a lot of them in the chat, a lot of familiar names of people that have been long involved with the organization and with the conservation efforts. So thank you to all of you there also who've been putting in so much work for so long. We don't have any questions coming up just yet, but I'm going to give it just a moment. So I think this was a great way to wrap up our webinar series. I can't say that before 2020, I had necessarily been planning to do a webinar series, but you know, the times have changed a little bit, and it's been a great way for us to continue to accomplish our mission, which is engaging people in these efforts, these conservation efforts during COVID. So it's been a great opportunity, and we now have all these great presentations on video for sharing later with future volunteers. I don't know if anybody else has any final words to throw out here.
Just thank you, Susie and Daisy, and for everyone who showed up. It was fun to read the comments. Yeah, we just sort of scratched the surface of the history, and I just so appreciate all the different folks some I recognize on the chat tonight who have been a part of it, and we're going strong. And as Mike laid out the future there's still much work to do, and I look forward to working with you all.
And again, I just want to say thank you to all of you. And, you know, just I'm barely starting my conservation career, and I'm really proud and admire every single one of you. All you guys are all my conservation heroes. So thank you all for doing what you've done and doing what you continue to do for the future.
We're honored to work with you too, Daisy.
All right, well, I think that I don't see any questions, so just we'll wrap it up. And again, thanks everybody for being here. Thank you to our presenters, and thanks for all the people who attended the webinar too, because I know that there's so many of you that have put in so much to these efforts as well. And hopefully we'll all be able to celebrate in person together this year with some upcoming events. So keep an eye out for those. We're doing more and more stuff in person these days. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for being here. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks. Bye. Good night, everyone.